Go ahead. Oh, hello, everybody. Wow, these lights are not bright. So our next session, we're going to go ahead and skip lunch just to get ahead of time. And I am going to introduce Jeff John Roberts, who is a crypto and finance editor with Fortune, and he is going to moderate our next panel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. This is, my goodness, I think I've been coming to these things for 7 years, since the old days in the Sports Palace. Some of you may remember, this is a good venue, the Plumbing Works. And I'm here to talk to Danny Ryan, Ethereum OG, and more recently, co-founder and president of Etherealize.
Thanks for having me. These are the brightest lights I think I've ever experienced.
No pressure. Yeah, no, I think it's neat because, Danny, of course, landed the merge, which I've covered crypto a long time. I think it was the most impressive technical feat I've seen the crypto community pull off. And now you're onto something new, and I think the title is officially Wall Street's report card. So you're now spending your days with Wall Street people. How's that going?
It's funny to say, but I'm having a blast. Very crypto native. I'm in a totally strange environment, but I learn a ton all the time. And they're actually eager to use the things that we've been building, and I think we can actually begin to upgrade systems and change things for the better. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is not a fair question, but can you give a 30-second overview of what Wall Street's financial plumbing looks like right now?
Ooh. So it's a wide range. Some stuff is okay. Some stuff is moderately efficient. Some stuff is in the Stone Age. And even the stuff that's okay, though, is kind of hilarious when you do a historic anthropological study of it. So, for example, most public market trading is settled by the DTCC. The DTCC, I think, was created as a consortium in the 60s. Essentially, they just had too much paper. They were like the paper notes of who owned the stocks and the bonds, and they had to move them around. And they're like, well, let's just put them in one place, and then we'll have pointers to that one place. And so the DTCC actually became like the centralized ledger for public markets and made the markets more efficient. So funny stuff like that. But then you look at some private markets, and stuff takes 20 days to settle. People are manually checking stuff. They're faxing stuff to each other. The email is the trail of evidence. Someone's going and looking at a complex agreement and manually checking, okay, when this happens, I'm supposed to do this. And it's just, we can definitely do better.
Yeah, and I think that's a piece of history is interesting too. There was called the Great Paper Crisis in the 60s or 70s, where the markets were actually closed on Monday and Friday because there was all these people running around with boxes of paper. Does Danny own that piece of stock? Do I own it? How do you keep track of it? And that still matters too. I mean, knowing who owns what asset is critical.
I was talking to Chairman Atkins of the SEC this morning, and I didn't realize, but during Hurricane Sandy, all of that paper is in a vault, and the vault flooded. And I think they recovered most of it, but it was just what the hell are we doing here? We need to do better.
Do you see a role for blockchain in this?
Yeah. I mean, things that I'm crypto native. I hear how some of these systems work, and I get confused because I'm for example, you and I might decide to trade. A bunch of stuff happens, and then I get the asset that you're giving me. And then I get a funding memo, and I'm supposed to send you the money. And these things are not premised upon each other. And people play games. And they're like, oh, well, I'll send you the money in a few days. I like my float. Whereas in crypto, it's the system, I would never give you an asset if you didn't give me the money. This would be a smart contract, and it would just happen. And so when you start realizing even just the small unlocks when you begin to program these markets on top of Ethereum, it's huge. It's massively huge.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, let's say, middlemen that could be eliminated. You don't want to take anyone's job away, but transfer agents, there's all these niche things clearing houses, settlement houses, transfer agents, that is literally 6 guys in a back office writing stuff down. And that was there for good reason once upon a time. But, how hard is it to dislodge this and replace it?
Yeah. So the closer you get to consumer, the tighter the regulations are. So when you're talking about public markets, equities, bonds, things that consumers touch, there's a lot of regulation. And I think we're going to see some interesting stuff there. The SEC announced at the beginning of the year they're going to do a regulatory exemption to allow people to experiment with bending the rules, making an exception for this in smaller environments, maybe cap it at $1 billion or something like that. $1 billion small in Wall Street terms. And see how things can be better. Things can be potentially better for business and potentially safer for the consumer. And hopefully that would inform rulemaking in the future. But as you get further away from consumer use cases and some of these like institutional type markets, private markets, a lot of the point-to-point interactions between banks and financial institutions, there are legal ways to do things, and you can do legal things on top of blockchains. The Genius Act was actually a big signal to banks that this was the case, like, oh, this isn't illegal infrastructure. And so if you just do the legal things on top of blockchains, you get massive, massive efficiencies. Like these, for a particular asset class, I know a large bank has 90 people helping settle trades and account for where things are and who's handling, who has the assets at any given point. And when you throw that on a blockchain, I don't know if any of them should. Sorry, they should all have jobs, but that back office operation just falls out. You just don't need it. And so across the spectrum, again, in these more institution use cases, we can just like go in and begin programming things, and we are. On the consumer stuff, it's going to take a lot more in terms of rulemaking, working with the SEC, working with the CFTC, and working with lawmakers. There's seen big strides there, but hopefully over the next couple of years, we continue to see some movement.
I'm curious, so when you're sitting down with like BlackRocks and players like this, the quintessential Wall Street firms, how deep in Ethereum are they? Like, are any of these firms running validators, or like, do they speak Ethereum?
It's a wide range. So most of these firms have digital asset teams, which many have existed for years, but been kind of relegated into the corner. They have become a source of expertise for the firms. So they're the ones that are queued into validators and to decentralization and security, and they're the ones that are helping bring other parts of the firm up to speed and be forward thinking. For example, I've hung out with the Fidelity digital assets team, and they're working on their ETFs and their staking ETFs, and they're very concerned about like staking in-house and being decentralized and making sure that they're protecting their consumers and doing right by the network, which is very cool. But if you go and talk to somebody else, at the credit desk at Fidelity, they're going to be like, blockchain, what is that? And if they're willing to listen, after you have a conversation for about 30 minutes, the light bulb usually goes off. This is less of taboo territory, so people are willing to understand and see the future. But it does take a good conversation. It does take understanding their pain points and seeing how you can improve things.
Yeah, and I think it's partly a function of demographics, because Fortune's office in Wall Street, I talk to these guys. The people calling the shots are people in their 60s and 70s. That's the cadre of senior executives and CEOs and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but you kind of go down to people up to age 40. Everyone is kind of crypto native, not everyone, and I think it's just a matter of waiting and generational change. So do you find that at all, that there's kind of younger people who get it, and then working for people who don't know or don't care?
Ever since Larry Fink said the world was going to be tokenized in 2024, all of those CEOs, CFOs that are later in their career and a bit older, they either care now and are beginning to understand, or they know that they should care and they're worried that their lunch is going to get eaten by somebody else. So there's a willingness, even though there's not always the understanding, there's certainly a willingness to look at this tech. The Larry Fink stuff, looking at fintech like Robinhood launching, slated to launch an L2 and things like that, they're definitely there's a mixture of fear and opportunity, depending on who you're talking to, but there's a sense of urgency.
Let's talk about blockchains for a bit, because this sort of news this week or last was this entity out of Vancouver called Layer Zero, and Citadel Securities invested in. They're, of course, a ginormous financial firm. And they want to, it's the new blockchain, just what the world needs, yet another blockchain. And the argument is like, oh, better privacy control and it's fast enough and stuff. But having covered this space for more than a decade, I've seen this before. There's this silly entity, no offense, called R3. And a bunch of banks got together and it's like, no, we're going to do the blockchain. We'll do it our way. And just these big consortiums never seem to work. But, so we've got this new player and it's got some big names behind it. And then there's, Ethereum, L1, what you're doing, and then the L2s. I mean, how's all this going to shake out?
For substantial use cases, for fundamentally upgrading markets and internal operations, I would argue, and most believe me when I argue it, that there's only one answer right now. And that's the thing that's the most decentralized. They don't care about that. They care about the track record, the uptime, the security, the no one controls it, no counterparty risk, that kind of stuff. And when you translate it into that lens, there's only one answer right now for these critical use cases. When you're talking about distribution, when you're talking about where should I put that money market fund, let it go wherever it wants, wherever there's demand, right? And so we're gonna see assets go where there's demand for assets, but we're talking about fundamentally upgrading markets and core infrastructure. People aren't betting on blockchains that come out tomorrow. They're betting on the thing that they understand, the thing that has been around, the thing that has a track record.
Yeah, and since we're sort of having a Wall Street talk, I've got to ask, if these institutions do sign up en masse, is that going to translate to more transactions and more money spent on gas and to be crude, the price of Ethereum going up at some point?
I don't know much about price. Your guess is as good as mine. I know that it will make the network effects, probably its core asset, more fundamentally valuable in terms of how these things will be valued in terms of their price. Your guess is as good as mine.
You've been doing this too long. Yeah.
I work on the stuff. I own the stuff. I believe in it.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, and I want to actually, let's talk some, philosophy. There's sort of a strain of thought out there right now that's like, look, crypto's killer use case is clearly finance. It's stable coins, it's DeFi, it's finance. And that's kind of the prevailing wisdom right now. And frankly, from my know of Wall Street and covering finance, blockchain is perfect for Wall Street. It can really overhaul that. But here's the but. Did everyone get into this stuff to go help rich bond traders trade bonds faster? And, the other cool stuff like, smart contracts for, IP rights or movies or culture, are we sort of giving up on that? And if so, what do you do with the great culture that's sprung up around ETHDenver, where I think most people here, get up in the morning passionate about things other than bonds?
Right. So there's a few things there. One, I don't know if I'll say I don't care about Wall Street on stage, but I do care about democratized access to finance. I do care about more global capital formation and participation. I do care about economic prosperity, and I do believe that if you upgrade, $120 trillion of the world's investable assets are managed by financial institutions of, I think, estimated 200 trillion. There's many different estimates, but that's one of them. I think that if we're going to make that impact to access and global participation and lift all boats, I think we have to upgrade financial institutions. We have to upgrade these legacy markets. And so from that, there is a mission there. And I think that mission is very powerful and I think very impactful. That said, these financial use cases drive other things. These financial use cases require identity. These financial use cases require privacy. These financial use cases require not only fungible assets, but rich, non-fungible asset use cases. And everything else that you mentioned, require these things or can layer and build off these things and take and use. And so often even if there's like a hyper-concerted domain of interest for any given period of time of what people are building on top of Ethereum, I think the impact continues to ripple outward, right? Like I haven't been a huge, like I haven't been a, sometimes you look at DeFi and you go, that's just like a casino. But we're proving out how to do things in secure ways. We're proving out how to build secure dApps. We're proving out standards and extensible things, and thus you can then do more. And so I think even though there's a big obvious financial thing to do with these systems, that doesn't preclude all of the others, and it probably becomes reinforcing. Ethereum and blockchains in general about network effects, and the more of ownership that's on chain, probably the more that identity's on chain, and the more interactions that are outside of the financial become on chain. And so like the network effects of the many different things that can happen, I think are reinforced by building out finance, not pushed out.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. $1 trillion worth of capital adopting this technology is going to see it improved, and new stuff will come out, and it'll probably have a trickle-down effect. But surely you'd agree the vibe on Wall Street in New York City feels a little different than the vibe here in this arena. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And quite frankly, if I do my job right, we're going to make classic finance look much more like DeFi and much more like the chain native stuff that are happening over here. It's a path.
Yeah, and the other thing too, in covering Wall Street, governance matters too. How do you write the rules so people don't cheat and steal and stuff like that? And how do you just run stuff? And a lot of thought in Ethereum has gone into that. So if you don't mind, Danny, I'd like you to look back. You did 7 years at the Ethereum Foundation and sort of did God's work there. That said, I don't think the foundation model is perfect. It's too slow. The DAO thing too, we all like it in theory, but trying to get anything done is really hard. So what, looking back, lessons do you have? Is there anything you would have done different, or advice do you have for the foundation going forward?
Oh, I don't know. I think they do a pretty damn good job. It's a hard job. I don't know, during the era that I was there, it was all about lifting up others, lifting up the community, making sure that the foundation was not singularly responsible, and if it literally disappeared tomorrow, that Ethereum would still exist and still grow and change. And I think during that era, they did a fantastic job. Obviously, with Tomasz and Xiaowei jumping in and Tomasz jumping out, there's been a lot of change over the past year, and I think they're trying to meet the world as it is. And I would just say, continue to do that. I think the world is much bigger than it used to be in terms of blockchain, in terms of all of the tendrils touching this thing. And so I think the world can handle a little bit more opinionated or vocal foundation without taking away from decentralization, because there's just so many players at the table now. But I'm a fan. I like the EF. I like the work that they do. I'm not going to complain too much.
Well stated and sounded sincere. To end too, we were talking earlier about you got up to you're a hell of a coder by all reports, but you had to learn finance. And for those people out there who I learned about finance in my early 30s. The people in this room, what would you tell them if they wanted to kind of get their head around finance? What's the best way to do that?
Obviously you can hang out with an AI. They're getting pretty damn good. But Etherealize is working because I came from deep inside of Ethereum, and Vivek, my co-founder, came from Wall Street, and so we're smashing together both of these worlds, and we have this kind of bi-directional bridge. So I would say if you're trying to bring Ethereum into somewhere that you're not super familiar with, find that person to join up to, cross the language and speak in both directions.
That's very practical. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but please give it up for Danny Ryan, one of the OGs of Ethereum. Thanks for your time, Danny.
Thank you.